Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the organizing this session, and thanks for everybody sticking it out to the end of the day here. I'll be talking about a water use data set that me and colleagues have been working on, and just to give you a little background, we never intended to really jump into redeveloping water use data for the US, but in trying to use available information for a long period of record, specifically into the 1950s, there wasn't a readily available data set for that entire time period. And so that's why we ventured into this work to develop a water use data set. It's really more accurately called a reanalysis, which is used quite regularly in the climate world. Just to start out, I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors on this work and the funding from Department of Energy, Multisector Dynamics program, as well as the Energy Water Nexus Knowledge Discovery. And so water use in the US is dominated by thermoelectric power, irrigation, and public water supplies. That's over 90% of the withdrawals, and so that's what we focused in our work. And you'll find that from the 50s through the early 2000s, there was pretty much an increase in, well, really into the early 90s, an increase, then it plateauing, and in recent years we've seen a decrease from efficiency. And so this suggests that there are signs of adaptation and declines in water use. The question is, will this work in the future with expected increases in US populations, increases in electricity generation, which are still predominantly conventional technologies, and then increases in crop production? So the question is, why do we need a reanalysis of water? Well, if you look at the prevailing and predominantly used data set is the USGS Water Circular Series, and that extends from 1950 to 2015. That's produced every 5 years, but as what I call hodgepodgey. It has a number of different subsectors that are presented in different years. It is not spatially consistent. At the county level, which is still relatively coarse, is not available until 1985 to present. And then we see a number of subsectors, such as splitting out, partitioning crop irrigation versus golf, not showing up but for a subset of years. So we really, to be able to look at long-term trends in water use, to be able to look at adaptations in water use, we need a consistent analysis, a consistent data set, and a spatially, temporally scalable methodology to do so. So that's what we set out to do, is to develop a reanalysis of water use for 66 years at the county or even site level for these three sectors: electric power production, irrigation, and public supply. And so for electric power production, just at a high level here, we're taking a coefficient approach. So there's different technologies that generate electricity, and we use the fuels, prime movers, and cooling technologies, and we base these coefficients on a per megawatt hour basis to synthesize historical patterns in generation that we can then apply these coefficients to. For irrigation, a huge lift was compiling historical data on crop acreage and golf acreage, and according to different crop types, and then creating a crop water demand model that takes into account crop water use, growth stage, irrigation, conveyance, and climate. And we've now reanalyzed that at a daily time step for the entire period of record. And then finally, public supply, there's really, we were missing a good mechanistic approach to estimate public supply. So we take a statistical approach, namely random forests, and then using population, surrogates of infrastructure, and climate land use to do so. So that's our high-level methods for each one of those, and I'll jump into each one of these sectors specifically. So for electric power production, we develop a master list of all power plants and generators found in the Energy Information Administration. This resulted in almost 9,000 plants and 24,000 generators that were at sometime in operation from 1891 to 2016. You can see the data that's available for many of those, and we use this information for mainly two things. Number one is we have to develop a comprehensive data set on annual generation. How much are these generators generating? And so we have that information from 2001 to present. Prior to that, we have to rely on when the generators were in operation based on the dates of operation and capacity factors. There are certainly assumptions with doing that, but that's what we have available. The other aspect is getting water use coefficients for each generating unit. And that's a messy exercise. Those are provided by datasets, but many of those electric generating units, those EGUs, have missing cooling data. So we have to gather that together. I'm not going to jump into the details of that, but it does take a lot of work. And eventually, when the result is that we're able to develop water use coefficients per megawatt hour for a number of different technologies, 35 to be exact, that are combinations of fuels, cooling technologies, and prime movers. And we have different ranges of values for withdrawals and consumption for those EGUs. And this is more of the list here. And so, so then we were able to summarize this, and you can see the maps of individual power plants on the right for different years from 1950 to current, and the bottom right panel showing the USGS data. And then we also are summarizing that at the county and state level as well. Okay, so crop irrigation is kind of also reliant on a mechanistic approach. The equation at the top essentially is estimating withdrawal as the area of the acreage irrigated times the consumptive crop water requirement divided by the efficiency of water loss, which is essentially loss due to conveyance. And so we were basically taking this approach for the 43 crops listed in this table, many of which had actual irrigated land acreage available, many only had total lands available, which meant we had to estimate that. The historical data on crops was extremely messy. It required getting data from the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research at U Michigan, and they had compiled historical data from the Ag Census from the 1800s to present. And so this was a very messy data set. It took manually going through these variables and making sure there was consistency. As a example, this is a county and the amount of acres for corn for silage over time. And notice that this is on every 4 to 5 year period. And then you see lettuce. And in times there may be missing data, which was indicated as missing, as non-zero values. And so we were able to use imputation procedures to estimate what that was. And then within 4 to 5 year periods, we used nonlinear spline interpolation to get an annual estimate of acreage for these different crops. We used a daily crop irrigation model. Essentially, this is looking at reference evapotranspiration and then crop factors. You can see this example of a crop coefficients for corn for silage. Those are regionally explicit. And so we did this at both monthly and daily time steps, and honestly the daily at the resolution we're at did not provide much improvement, but we can understand that when dealing with climate information. So we used two approaches. There was one in which we did not consider climate, we're just basing it on crop demand, and then the other in which we're actually considering climate, where we look at precipitation and daily surface runoff and daily changes in soil moisture. We're also considering the efficiency of irrigation procedures. as well. And so we're getting this at, again, a county resolution. For golf course irrigation, this was a little bit, there's no really data on acreage for golf courses historically, and so we had to develop really a backcasting approach to do so. And so one data source we obtained was the US Golf Course database. And this is a location of golf courses, the year they were built, and the number of holes. So then, based on the year built, we were able to reconstruct the number of holes for a given county for every year. And then through relationships between the number of holes and the size of the golf course, we're able to extrapolate and get acreage of golf course. And then instead, similar to crop irrigation, we're using turf grass KC values and the types of turf grass grown in different areas. And so this is a map of the golf courses that were part of that US Golf Course data set across the US. And so these are maps of county level irrigation, and you can see the comparison between our data and the USGS. So public supply, we used a statistical modeling approach. There really was very difficult to take a mechanistic approach just simply because of the variety of ways in which this data set is reported. And so we compiled a large laundry list of variables from population to land cover to reservoir storage, and as surrogates of infrastructure and climate information to use this to calibrate our model to the USGS data, and then use that to backcast in time. And here is a map of separate years for public supply over time. So I know I've gone through this really quickly, and because there's a lot of stuff, details here that would probably bore everyone, and I don't want to do that. I think I want to talk about the value of the data. And so in one way, there's just a lot of data here, and what you're looking at in this picture is the slope of changes in irrigation water use, electricity production water use, and public supply at the county level from 19. So you're looking at the slopes of those changes from 1950 to 2016. And so the data behind that's just very rich. So if we look at this, the irrigation, electricity production, and public supply water use, this is broken up into regions as specified on the maps, and then each line is a county. And so from 1950 to 2016, there is individual records that we've estimated for every county for each of these sectors. And then there's subsectors underlaying each one of these major three sectors. Now, one of the things that we're comparing this to is the USGS data, and the reason that we wanted to do this. And so on the right, you're seeing the USGS data, and you're seeing all the individual lines from 1985 to 2015. And then prior to that time, you're seeing a smaller subset of lines. Those are state level data. And so the big thing I want you to take away from this image is the volume of data available for that in why and which we need to reconstruct data from historically to fill in these values. And so again, I mentioned that we have subsectors. So this is within irrigation. These are examples of 3 different products: corn for grain, wheat, golf, the water use used for those across the entire period of record. And so in terms of validation, we've compared this with the USGS. Public supply and irrigation actually match up fairly well. And then electricity production, not so much. And we compare this to other data products and show why that is. I won't go into that, but enough to say that we are taking a viable approach, and it's a viable and reliable approach. And so again, looking at some of the data value and utility, the dashed line in the middle of these images shows the mark of where USGS data starts at the county level. And what you're seeing for these individual counties across the US for these three sectors is the value of looking retrospectively prior to 1985 at a county level. You can see there's big changes that were not apparent after 1985 in electric power, public supply, and irrigation. So having that complete temporal record is extremely important when we're looking at human adaptation strategies to water stress and how has society at large changed in their water use behavior. Another example is comparing drought severity and the value of having higher temporal resolution data when you're looking at influences of drought and water availability. And that's what this figure is showing just at face value, is that the USGS data in dashed lines does not provide that interannual variability. And we're also showing that much of our data at times is departing from the USGS data, and really, especially for irrigation, is showing that there's more of a water stress issue that we predict than what USGS does, at least in some of these counties in California. Okay, and I know I ran through that really fast, but it was the end of the day, and so if there are any questions, I'll be glad to take them. Thank you again for sticking with me till the end here.
Thanks, Ryan, appreciate it. So yes, if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and enter those into the chat queue or raise your hand and I'll turn your microphone on. Just give it a little bit here.
So I can ask a question. Ryan, this is Mazdak Arabi from Colorado State University. Excellent work. I'm wondering if this data that you presented is also available now for comparative studies similar to what Landon just mentioned.
Yeah, great question. That's the intention. Is we currently, it's in getting close to resubmitting. We had some pretty heavy revisions on it, and it was submitted to Water Resources Research, and we're really close to resubmitting that. And the intention is that once that is accepted, we're putting it online for the community to use and to be available for validation and building upon. I think the important thing that we need, you know, that's really important to note is that this is version 1, and we hope that this helps with future work.
Thank you.